Hey guys, here we are with the film study of Kell Brook versus Errol Spence for their upcoming fight in the Building a House series. The reason that that's important is a lot of people attribute a fighter being sharp, throwing fast, crisp punches, and being a hard puncher as boxing skills, and those are not boxing skills. Ask Kevin Cagle when he fought Yuri Foreman. Yuri Foreman, right? Not the greatest fighter. That guy, Kevin Cagle, punches hard. He punches quickly, but he got his ass beat. Anyway, that's an obscure boxing reference. But nevertheless, speed and power and being sharp are not what fighting is all about, right? It helps. Those are your tools, right? That's your base. But it's the application of those skills. Feinting, probing, setting your punches up with probes or feints, not having a stale guard, right? Like, as stupid as that sounds, but having an active guard. Anything that you do to set your punch up, there are always going to be punches that are open, right? And a lot of fighters use those openings to punch at their opponent and then look with their eyes to find other openings off of how their opponent reacts, right? But one thing that separates C-level fighters from B-level fighters is the amount of danger you put yourself in to set up your offense. If you run in and you throw a 1-2 at your opponent and you see that the way that he blocks the 1-2 leaves him open for a left uppercut after, because for whatever fucking reason, doesn't matter. But you have to throw a 1-2, a committed 1-2 to figure that out. Your opponent just had so many opportunities to counter you and to put you on the floor. Maybe you were open when you threw your jab, or you didn't throw your right hand, like your right hand wasn't the greatest tool, so he was able to counter it with his own uppercut. Anytime you put yourself into position to be in danger and be hurt by your opponent, to figure something out about your opponent, you are doing yourself a disservice. You want to figure those things out with feints, right? It's a little different, jabbing at the end of your jab to figure out how your opponent's going to react. Maybe he's going to counter, maybe he's not. Maybe he's going to drop his hands and just take a step back. Maybe he's going to shoot to the side. But whatever he's going to do, maybe he's going to slip inside and then look to catch you with the hook. But you have to do something to get information from your opponent so you can set him up for clean shots. And that's what building a house is all about. Okay, it sounds ridiculous, it sounds stupid, but being faster than your opponent, being stronger than your opponent, that's not setting up punches. That doesn't help you land clean shots, except that you're faster than them, right? But they can still time you, they can still feint you and make you react and land big shots. So the less danger you put yourself in to set up punches, the better of a fighter you are. Because even just looking at a fighter like Errol Spence, if Kell Brook goes in there and fights like a C-level fighter, running in, throwing 1-2s, trying to catch him, Errol Spence is fucking fast. He's really sharp. He doesn't waste a lot of energy with his punches. He throws them all really hard. He commits to them, so there's energy there. But he doesn't waste the movement, right? They get there quickly, and he hits fucking hard. Errol Spence is going to beat the shit out of a lot of C-level fighters quite easily because his tools are so sharp. But if you can force someone to make mistakes with your feinting and your probing and your level changing and whatever else is that you want to do to set your shots up with your head movement, you can land clean shots against them even if their tools are sharper than yours, as I showed in the Chris Algieri film study. But anyway, let's go ahead and get to this fight. I talked for like 5 fucking minutes already about bullshit. But let's go ahead and get in this. Let's look at his tools, but let's look at his boxing skills, right? The things that he does on top of the fact that he's sharp, he's a good athlete, all of the tools that he uses to build a house. So coming out, jabbing, right? This is kind of concerning. I don't like this right away, right? Look at where Kell Brook's foot is, right? As he jabs and he steps inside of lead foot dominance, right? And that's only so that he can land his jab, right? You don't want to give away lead foot dominance to your opponent, but it's really hard because of the way that your hands are held. If you go for outside lead, if you go for lead foot dominance, you kind of have to throw it as a cross, but then your opponent's hand is inside, so maybe they catch you with a quick hook, or they're able to control your arm or your head, right, by getting their arm on top of your jab arm. But in this instance, he's giving away lead foot dominance, and Errol Spence is a huge puncher. So although we do know that Errol Spence is not much of a counterpuncher, we saw Chris Algieri leading a lot, and Errol Spence not counterpunching him, nearly never counterpunching him, and not even trying to counterpunch, but he threw a couple counters and they didn't even come close to landing. But if Errol Spence can kind of get that into his game, when Kell Brook goes to jab at him, maybe he can time him when he gives away lead foot dominance and catch him with the big left hand. With that said, we also saw in the Errol Spence video that Errol Spence doesn't move his head a lot. His head is basically planted. He changes levels sometimes, but that's only when he's setting up lead foot dominance to throw his straight left. So if Kell Brook is timing him with this, I think the first few rounds, Kell Brook is probably going to be able to get away with putting his foot on the inside again, and you can't see it with the round thing in the way, but putting his foot on the inside to land his jab. And I think that that's something that Kell Brook might have success early with, even though Errol Spence could still catch him with body shots after, or like big left hands. Now this is really interesting. Kell Brook shoots a straight right, and then jumps forward, and then catches him with like a left cross jab kind of thing. And then my video freezes a little bit. But the reason that it's interesting is because, like I just said a few seconds ago, Errol Spence keeps his head in one spot at all times. He doesn't have an active guard, and that's why, and that's going to cause a lot of problems for him, because Kell Brook is quick. He has good tools, right? And even when he moves out of the way, I can see things just like this happening in the Errol Spence fight, because Errol Spence moves straight back. So that's going to be something that Errol Spence needs to work on, is head movement, or controlling his opponent, or taking an angle a little sooner. As you see, he tries to move straight back and gets cracked with that second shot. And that looks like something that, especially because Errol Spence doesn't counterpunch, that looks like a technique that might really work for Kell Brook. Again, goes for a straight right, lands it. He has his left hand up, so a decent defense right there. Did he shift right there too? Yeah, he did shift right there, but he moved back. This is something that's really interesting, and I want to highlight that after he throws the right hand. There are going to be other instances in which he's going to do that, and I'll be able to point out why he's doing it better. But in this particular situation, if he throws that right hand and Errol Spence takes a step back like this guy does, Errol Spence can land a big shot, right? Errol Spence, we have seen Errol Spence in the Algieri fight even get countered or get hit with a punch and move back and then land shots of his own, right? He's very experienced, in spite of the fact that he doesn't have nearly as many pro fights, but he knows when there's going to be openings, when there's not, like how to, one of the things that you learn in the amateurs is to never let your opponent get the last hit, right? So So Errol Spence definitely takes advantage of that really well. And if Kell Brook comes in with a right hand and steps in like this and leaves that amount of distance, he's going to get hit with a punch for sure. But we'll see later. We'll see later when he does that, and it winds up being pretty effective for him. Now, this is one of the things that makes me think that Errol Spence is going to have a lot of trouble with Kell Brook. You see him jab, right? And this guy, he's an Algieri level fighter, right? His tools are not as sharp, right? But he's like a decent fighter. I think he had like a bunch of like amateur fights and whatever. It's not important. But you see Kell Brook is able to time him and counter his jab, right? He doesn't land it because the guy's really cautious, right? But Kell Brook shows that he likes to counterpunch. And that's an interesting thing. Like when Chris Algieri was counterpunching Errol Spence, even when he wouldn't hit Errol Spence would get really gun shy and cover up, and it would stop Errol Spence from throwing punches, and that would be enough for him to back him up. And as you watch through the course of this fight, Kell Brook tries to counter nearly every single punch that his opponent throws, almost every single one. And if he's doing that to Errol Spence, he's going to make Errol Spence look for other ways to set up offense rather than just off of his jab. But also, one of the biggest ways that Errol Spence sets up his offense, remember, is the feint jab, establish lead foot dominance while he's pushing your guard down and getting his hand on the outside of you, then throwing a right or a left uppercut, left straight, and then a right hook to the body. But we'll see how Kell Brook deals with that. So right here, you have him throwing the straight right, and then he shifts in, throws another straight right because his opponent is moving straight back, just like Errol Spence does. And again, Errol Spence is fast. He's sharp. Maybe he could catch Kell Brook after taking that first shot with the counter, at least with a counter while he dips or while he turns to the right and throws a left body shot. But this is really interesting because this is something that Leonard Bundu did against Errol Spence, and every time he would change stances, Leonard Bundu, like kind of being a clown, like shifting his head from side to side and dipping and moving his hands really quickly, changing guard, giving him different looks. That kind of stuff really sets Errol Spence off, and we saw a lot of it also with the Chris Algieri. I'll try to maintain everything that I talk about with the Chris Algieri fight, because I've already shown and proved what was going on in that fight. But whenever Chris Algieri would give him angles, right, give him a little bit of head movement, give him little feints, Errol Spence would move back and he wouldn't punch with him. He couldn't really figure out what he was doing, and it wasn't part of his game plan. Now, while Brook doesn't have the most active guard, he does feint a little bit. Here he is changing right there, feinting, probing with his jab. That's really important, trying to get his opponent to react. And then his opponent doesn't react, so he goes and throws a punch, right? Even the counters coming back from this guy, Frankie Gavin, I think, he doesn't land them because it's, even though he's committing to this jab, he's prepared for a counter. But I don't like that he moves to this side, right? Because that's where Errol Spence is going to want him to move. Errol Spence always tries to get lead foot dominance and pin you and catch you while you're moving out. So if Errol Spence were to try to counterpunch and take lead foot dominance there instead of throwing the straight left, he could catch some body shots on Kell Brook as he's circling out right there. A lot of feinting and stuff, and this is all stuff that gives Errol Spence trouble. Again, though, I do want to point out Kell Brook stepping inside, right? Giving away lead foot dominance, right? Again, right? Not as much there, but it's still there. And we do know that Errol Spence, almost all of his offense is predicated off of lead foot dominance and then throwing body shots. I'm not sure if that winds up being a punch, but as soon as he goes to jab, Kell Brook counters him. And then I can't tell if this body shot lands, but you see Kell Brook trying to be really responsible and catch it. Then he controls his head, and he doesn't land the follow-up punch. But as you see, I think he gets. I can't tell if he gets lead foot dominance, but Errol Spence is not going to be throwing a hook to the head here. He almost exclusively throws the body shot, especially after he throws the body shot here. Right, so boom, and you get your opponent, like he did to Chris Algieri a lot, gets him to dip down a little bit and then throws a right to the body. But one thing I do want to focus on right here, and this is one of the problems that Algieri had, once he gets in this position, Algieri would try to circle out to his left, and it would cause him to get pinned, and there were a couple of times where Errol Spence was able to catch him when he was moving out. The first time it was a right hook to the body. You couldn't really tell if it landed on the arm and he blocked it, or if it hit him on the right side of his body or the left side of his body, but it doesn't matter. The punch was there, whether he landed it or not. And then the other time in the last round, I think it was the last round. No, I don't know which round it was, but it was the one where he caught him with the left uppercut hook thing and knocked him down. It might have been the first knockdown that he landed. But that happened. That was a product of him trying to circle out to his left and just, Errol Spence beating him on the pivots and beating him onto the line and pounding him. However, Kell Brook showing that he moves out to his right, boom, and he pivots out that way, completely getting away from all the danger, in spite of the fact that he would have probably taken that body shot. Again, very active with his jab, and I think that that's something that gives Errol Spence a little bit of trouble. Very active with his straight right. I'm not sure if he catches him with that. It looks like he does. Yeah, it looks like he catches him, and then he shifts forward and throws another one. And we already know, like I said, that Errol Spence moves straight back when he throws those punches. So he might be able to catch him and shift on him with the second punch. However, Errol Spence could eventually, around the third round, I think, that's when it started really hitting Errol Spence that he could counter or throw counters or even try to counter. But if he sees this in camp, this is something that he could very easily train for, the double right hand or whatever. But anyway, going back to orthodox, this guy lands. He goes lead foot dominance, throws a body shot, and I think it lands. But notice how Kell Brook, it does land. It does land. Notice how Kell Brook doesn't dip down and fold over like Chris Algieri did. And look at how he can almost come back with this hook right there. That's going to be something that might be really important for him when he does fight Errol Spence, because Errol Spence does go to the body with his straight left a lot, but he's also really open, as we saw. He doesn't have like a good defense, especially when he's throwing punches. Even though his guard's up when he's not throwing punches, he doesn't have an active guard, and he telegraphs his punches really well. Or it's really poor how he does that. Whereas if you notice, this opponent is feinting right here. He's dipping down, showing him his left hand, or showing him his right hand. He's got a really active guard, and that's going to make it a little easier for him to land punches against Kell Brook, because they're not all completely telegraphed. This is really interesting right here. Again, lead foot dominance, throws a body shot. Errol Spence usually tries to get in a little bit closer when he throws his body shot, right? He'll do the double fake, right? The feint jab while he takes one step, the second one to kind of pull your head down. But right here, he goes like he's countering the jab, or he's countering with the left hook. And I think that if he was fighting Errol Spence and Errol Spence had gone for the second body shot, he would have been able to catch him. Even though his opponent has lead foot dominance, Kell Brook would have been able to catch him with that body shot. So Errol Spence does have a tendency to throw both of the shots, but Errol Spence gets much deeper with his lead foot dominance in that situation. So we'll have to kind of see how that goes. A little bit of a variation here. And again, very subtle, right? Kell Brook with his guard, right? Moving his head so as not to telegraph his punches as much. You know, a little bit of feinting right there. Do it, and then throws the straight right. Catches him, gets lead foot dominance. And this is something that Errol Spence might wind up doing all night against Kell Brook, because Kell Brook is open for the body shot after he throws that straight right? Boom. And it's interesting because this time he goes for lead foot dominance and eats the body shot, and you don't want to be doing that against Errol Spence. And then right here, this is something that Errol Spence is really good at. The inside fighting, you call it. It's not exactly inside fighting what Errol Spence is doing a lot of times, because he does hold and hit a lot. So imagine how much worse this punch could be from Errol Spence when Errol Spence gets his hand on top of Kell Brook's head. So even winding up in with lead foot dominance, as you see his opponent gets his arm around him to stop him from being able to get around, and then lands that punch. That's going to be something that Kell Brook's going to need to work on. And interestingly enough, also this right here, how they just kind of break apart, that's not going to fly. Errol Spence is going to chase him down. So Kell Brook's going to need to work on controlling Errol Spence until the referee breaks him up, or until he can find a safe way to exit, because Errol Spence throws really long punches. But I do still think that he's going to have success, not only with his jab, but with his straight right. And right here, again, gives away lead foot dominance, and he could get hit with the big cross. I don't know that Errol Spence throws very many crosses against Chris Algieri. Usually when Chris Algieri tries to lead, he just moves back. And now this is really interesting. Kell Brook throws a jab, leans back, baits the jab from him, and then touches him on the top of the head. He doesn't exactly land it, right? But he's learning the distance and the rhythm to bait counters from Frankie Gavin so that he can land his own punches. But this is the most important part. After he misses, right, he does something very similar to what Errol Spence does, and that's get his hand on top of his opponent's head, right? He lets go, right? Now it's not on top, but it's just on his neck, but he holds him there so that he can't establish lead foot dominance, right? And then bodies up until the referee breaks, right? Now, it's hard to say, oh, that's all Kell Brook's fault, right? Because his opponent comes in with the body shot. Oh, let's take a look at that body shot, too. It kind of looks like it's really low. No, it could be legit. That could be a body shot, and that's also something that Errol Spence is going to do really well. So Kell Brook's going to need to find a way to neutralize that body shot for sure. Otherwise, Kell Brook is going to get hit by that all night. You've seen instances where he throws his straight right hand, and he's open for the body shot, and where he's countering the jab or throwing his own jab or cross, and he's open for the straight left. Errol Spence doesn't usually lead with his straight left, and when he does, he telegraphs it immensely. But we haven't really seen his opponent really lead too often. So we don't know actually exactly how Kell Brook is reacting to it. Again, catches him with a good jab. Not much feinting or anything in front of it, but catches him with it. Whoops. Illuminati! Oh no! Tries to double jab and eats a body shot. And again, that's something that Errol Spence does really well. And so far, Kell Brook's been open for it this whole film study, for this whole round. Boom. And then, again, goes in with the jab. But the only question is, from the film study that we saw, Errol Spence doesn't do any counterpunching. So is he going to have nearly the same success that that a lesser, a seemingly lesser fighter, Frankie Gavin, has been able to have against Kell Brook? Even though Frankie Gavin's tools are not as sharp as Errol Spence's, he seems to be a little bit more versatile so far. Again, Errol Spence doesn't really move a lot when he's on the back foot. He doesn't have like a seemingly good defense. To be fair, we haven't seen Errol Spence need to be defensive. He hasn't fought very many people that are like, oh, I'm just going to push this guy around and I'm going to bully him. I'm going to do this. because he's such a big guy and he's such a big puncher. It's dangerous to follow them around. So anyway, again, leading with the straight right, and then Frankie Gavin almost getting him with the counter. He gets the punch in there, but it kind of looks like it gets caught on his shoulder or whatever, like it gets stuck before it can reach his chin, and then he eats the double right hand. And that's something, if you notice, Frankie Gavin's moving straight back, and that's something that Errol Spence does very commonly too when his opponent starts punching at him, just move straight back. The lack of head movement, it really looks like Kell Brook's going to have a decent amount of success as long as he can neutralize the body shot that follows up. Because, all right. So this is really interesting, right? Let's go back, sorry. One more time. Frankie Gavin stops, throws the jab. It looks like it touches his chin, and he establishes lead foot dominance. And this is about the point where Errol Spence would be throwing his own jab, or his second jab. But Errol Spence counters with the hook, right? And then gets his arm around Frankie Gavin, right? So now he's the one with lead foot dominance, and we've seen, or not lead foot dominance. He's the one with head control, and we've seen a lot of times where Chris Algieri would go to counter Errol Spence, and Errol Spence would cover up and wouldn't follow up, right? And this looks very similar, except for the fact that Chris Algieri wouldn't look to control Errol Spence after throwing those punches. He would keep his hands to himself. Whereas Kell Brook controls his head, right, and makes sure that he's not taking any punches, and then controls his head after he throws the right hand. Look at how he gets his arm on his neck. And I had an interesting conversation with another viewer about that, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that, especially in this instance where he's not punching him, but using it to control his head and, kind of stop him from taking offense. But again, this is another thing that's not going to fly. Don't try to push off of Errol Spence. He's going to punch you in the head. He's just going to. He's too fast and he hits too hard to have like clean breaks like this. Wait for the referee or tie him up or something. Again, a good jab from Kell Brook, and he's much faster than Algieri. Throws a jab, lead foot dominance, and look at second jab to the body, but Kell Brook does something really good. Gets his arm around Frankie Gavin, and even though he kind of takes a low blow right there because he's pushing his head down, he gets his hand around him and stops him from continuing to be able to set up his offense, right? Boom. And that stops him from taking the right hook to the body and from taking as solid of a shot from the straight left, right? Controls his head as well, right? Still controlling his head, knows exactly where he is. Let's go, and then lands a punch on the way out. He's going to need to do this all night because the main way that Errol Spence showed in the Algieri fight to land clean and effective punches was to feint, jab again, and then get on top of his opponent. But as you notice, Kell Brook just leans back and gets away from it. He doesn't react to it the same way that Algieri was. Algieri was very panicked when the jabs would come at him, and Kell Brook is very calm. Look at his face when the punch comes. He just moves back a little bit and then comes in with the counter and then controls his head. He's going to need to be able to do that and test Errol Spence's jab to figure out, to get the timing of when he's throwing a regular jab, like a hard jab, and keeping all his weight on his right leg, stepping in with it, versus the faux jab that he throws just to get you to cover up or to duck down away from the straight left hand, the one to blind you and set up lead foot dominance. But he doesn't, even though he takes the body shot right there, he does a pretty good job of tying him up and stopping and neutralizing what would be his cleanest offense. And I don't know that he's going to be able to land that punch, the punch on the way out against Errol Spence. Sorry. But it's a good start, But Errol Spence, usually after he throws a combination, he's able to get out, and he never comes out, like, even though they're kind of coming out at angles, you know, you can see that Kell Brook beats him to the line, and then when he gets back onto the line, right, the line that they're fighting, he eats that shot. And that's not something that Errol Spence has a problem with. He usually is able to push himself far enough out of the way that he's not eating shots like this on the way out. And he finds himself way out of danger. Whether that be like being here and then moving, well, actually from this position, he kind of just needs to swing out and use some head movement. But he does do that very well. So I don't anticipate Kell Brook being able to land a lot of shots while his opponent circles out like that. But the next engagement here, straight left to the body. I think that, straight right to the body. I think that that's also something that's going to be very effective for Kell Brook, because Errol Spence doesn't move a lot, right? He doesn't counter a lot like we established. He just kind of moves straight back. And after he throws that punch, look at how well he's able to close his distance, right? If Errol Spence keeps moving straight in a straight line, and he might not do that. You know, we've never seen him be really pressured in a real fight, so he might react differently against someone he considers like a real threat. We don't really know because he hasn't fought a lot of it's not that he's not been fighting top tier guys, but like he hasn't fought anyone who's approaching, like B-class fighter, right? He's fought some good athletes and stuff. Like Leonard Bundu is no pushover, right? He's a live body for sure. But he's not like a supreme talent in spite of how much experience he has fighting and being on like the Italian national team or whatever. But anyway, he's not gonna be able to get away with moving straight back against Kell Brook. And let's not forget that Kell Brook is a freaking huge welterweight. Errol Spence looks big, but he's only 5'9.5", and Errol Spence and Kell Brook is 5'9", right? So they're roughly the same height, but Kell Brook is a huge man. So it's not like Kell Brook or Errol Spence is going to be bullying this guy around. But anyway, again right here, he throws a punch, like a little punch on the inside. These breaks right here, he's really going to need to wait for the referee because Errol Spence, he's just too fast and he hits too hard for you to want to take a risk like that. Anyway, I don't really like that from Kell Brook, just kind of eating this punch. Did I miss it already? I didn't go too far enough back. Yeah, just eating that punch. But look at how he responds after the jab, right? Ready to catch the left hand and then sees that it doesn't come and resets. So he's ready. He's showing that he has an understanding for boxing and a respect for his defense. Again, showing that he has a good jab. Frankie Gavin countering, missing because Kell Brook using head movement after the punches. Even though he doesn't land his punches. Whoops. I'll have to call those people back. I don't know who that is. Sorry about that. But after his opponent tries to counter him, he gets his hook in, right, and controls his head. I don't see anything wrong with that, but it also keeps his opponent from establishing lead foot dominance and setting up his offense. And that's something that Errol Spence tries really hard to do. And it's probably the thing that Errol Spence is the best at, is setting up the lead foot dominance and throwing the body shots. And again, he throws a jab. It misses, but he gets on top of him and stops him from being able to get lead foot dominance. And they kind of tangle up. This is something kind of worrisome, though. It's good that he gets his arm around his opponent, so his opponent can't hold his head down because his shoulder's on top of him. So that's going to be something that he really needs to work on when fighting Errol Spence. Whoops. Anyway, so some things that Kell Brook has shown that he does really well so far. Preventing lead foot dominance. Getting his arm around his opponent to stop him from taking that the better position and allowing him to set up his shots. And as we saw in the Chris Algieri fight, the best and most cleanest punches that he was able to land were all off of lead foot dominance. And when you get your opponent against the ropes, which usually happened after he would land a combination or something. But Kell Brook has shown that he's been able to neutralize that, at least in the case of Frankie Gavin. He's shown that he's able to watch and pick apart Frankie Gavin's jab, right, by just taking like a slight movement back and being ready for the straight left hand. He's shown a lot of interesting things, and I think that so far the matchup, if that was Frankie Gavin or if that was Errol Spence in front of him, the fight is pretty similar. And simply the fact that he's able to block the lead foot dominance so far, I think that Kell Brook has the advantage. Some concerning points are how open he seems to be for the body shot when he's punching, right? And that's always going to be something that's very difficult because the body shot is exactly what's open, when you're fighting a left-hander or a right-hander, and it's so hard to guard against because you can't really turn away from it. You kind of only turn into it or square yourself up. So Errol Spence, especially because he does a lot of great body work, that's going to be something that he really wants to look for when fighting Kell Brook. And so far, that looks like the best avenue that he has for landing offense is off of is kind of countering Kell Brook's punches. Even though he's not a counter puncher, that's going to be something that he might need to work on because Kell Brook does like to lead. Anyway, that's going to be it for this round. I'll try to get the next round up in probably an hour or so. But like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you think. Thanks, guys.